Last week, I massively screwed up my own network, but then I was able to fix it. Now, this is one of those situations where you're trying to fix something that broke. In this case, my UniFi Protect UNVR died, and I needed to replace it. And then since I had my network rack torn apart to work on that UNVR, I decided to do a simple, easy, 10 gigabit switch upgrade as well. But during that switch upgrade, I was moving too fast and I wasn't paying enough attention, and I just made a really stupid mistake that took me in all sorts of wrong directions before I finally got it sorted out. So now, follow along as this story unfolds and see if you can spot where I messed things up. Let's get started. One of the best and easiest ways to support Crosstalk Solutions or any of your favorite YouTube channels is to hit that like and subscribe button so that you don't miss any new content. So do me a solid and hit subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up. It'll make you feel so good. It's like you just got tackled by a pack of soft, cuddly puppies. Originally, this video was going to be about repairing or replacing my failed UniFi Protect UNVR. So that's the best place to start. Let's rewind to the middle of last week and find out exactly why that UNVR died in the first place. Inside older models of the UNVR is a USB flash drive. If you look at your UNVR's back panel, you'll see a date code. If that date code says 2048 or earlier, that means that your UNVR was produced prior to November 2020, and it's going to be affected by this issue. So these flash drives have a limited lifespan, right? They just straight wear out after a while, and it causes the UNVR to stop booting. You get this fast flashing white LED. Newer models do not have a USB flash drive. So let's take a quick peek at the difference between the old UNVR and the new UNVR. Here we have the older generation UNVR, and you can see right there, there's the flash drive that has failed. And you'll notice also that it is kind of glued in here, so we're going to use a hot glue gun to get that out and replace it. In the newer model over here, look, there is no USB flash drive whatsoever. They have completely removed it. There are a couple of new chips here that aren't in the old one. There's this chip here as well as this one. You can see that those do not live over here in between these sort of cables that are coming from the power supply. There's also a few other differences that I noticed. First of all, we have this doohickey right here. Now, I don't know what this is. I'm not sure what it does. Popping in here from the future, that is an antenna for the Bluetooth transmitter, which probably gives the UNVR greater Bluetooth range for initial device discovery. But it plugs in down here and it's hot glued into COM1. There's also a couple of other chips right here. So this section right here, around this screw right here, notice on the old server, that does not exist. So they've definitely made some improvements between the old UNVR and the new UNVR. So for these older models, there's a few things to point out. First and foremost is that Ubiquiti is well aware of the failures of this flash storage drive in the older model UNVRs. Now, to their credit, not only have they extended the warranty for any affected server by 2 years, but they've also developed some software to try to mitigate this issue. With the upcoming release of UniFi OS for network video recorders version 3.1.7, that's currently in early access, Ubiquiti has developed a way to move data off of the failing USB drives and onto the hard drives that are installed into the UNVR, as long as you have at least one hard drive installed. Once version 3.17 is released, this should greatly reduce the failures that we're seeing with these older generation UNVRs. But if your server does fail, at least the warranty's been extended so that you can get one of the newer versions that does not rely on a USB flash drive to boot. The other thing that you should know about the USB flash drive issue is that it is actually recoverable. Simply by removing the old USB flash drive and inserting a new one, your UNVR should come back online. So even if you're out of the extended warranty period, there is still hope for recovering your UNVR. And that is what I am going to attempt to do in this video. First, I'm going to try to recover my failed UNVR by replacing the USB flash drive. And then we're going to be migrating over to this new UNVR that I received as part of the RMA process. And since I have to pull my network rack apart to replace the UNVR, we're going to do those much needed 10 gigabit upgrades as well. Okay, let's get started. I have a hot glue gun here that I'm going to use to try to loosen up the glue around the USB thumb drive. And then I have a Kingston USB 3 32 gig flash drive right here. That is slim enough that it should fit in here no problem. All right, so let's go ahead and do that first. All right, and I'm just gonna try to pry it up a little bit. It looks like it's already pretty loose. All right, let me turn off the heat gun here. Let's try to just get it right out. And there we go. So it does look like it came right out. Boom. No problem. All right, so here is the, ow, that is hot. Here is the failed drive right here. And we're gonna put that right there. And now let's go ahead and stick this drive in its place. There we go. Now we're gonna go ahead and plug in a network and fire it up. Hopefully the fix is as easy as that. I should mention also that I pulled out all of the hard drives before I did this, and I labeled them in the correct order so that when I put them back in, I'm not going to lose all my footage because the RAID volume has to be rebuilt if the drives were misordered. All right, so that took a little bit of time, but about 10 minutes later, and we can see that there is a solid white LED now. It is no longer doing that fast flashing LED, which is a good sign, but it means that it's in a factory default state. So let's go ahead and set up the UNVR. I found it had received an IP address from the DHCP server, and I connected to it. We're gonna say set up the UNVR and agree, next. And then we wanna sign in to UI.com. Now, since I had cloud backups enabled, it shows me that there is a backup from March 28th. So we're gonna select that backup and we're gonna say restore. And here we go. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this run, do its full restore, and then hopefully we're gonna come back with a solid blue LED on the front of the UNVR. All right, so restoration complete. We're gonna say continue, and here we go. Okay, so we have successfully logged in. It looks like we have an update for UniFi Protect. So let's go ahead and run that now. And notice down here in the corner here, it says your UNVR warranty has been extended. Click here for more information. And that brings you to the knowledge base article about the sort of flash drive issue and the extended warranty.
A few moments later.
So things have gone from bad to worse. The update went successfully. Some of my devices came back online, but some of my devices didn't. My Smart Chime didn't come back online. My AI Theta camera didn't come back online. I've got the AI 360 camera. It came on for a little while, but then disappeared again. So I thought, well, maybe there's something weird with the networking. So I set it back to a static IP address, to the same static IP address that it used to be. And after I did that, the entire thing went non-responsive. Okay, so quick cut in here. There have already been some clues about what happened to my network because it affected the UNVR restore. After the initial restore, some of my UniFi Protect devices were unavailable. Now, rebooting those devices didn't fix them, and also noticed that I suspected there was something going on with the networking because in troubleshooting those offline devices, I decided to set the IP address of my UNVR statically. So I was heading in the right direction as far as troubleshooting goes, but I ended up compounding the problem by screwing up my UNVR, which was my fault entirely, but also kind of a weird user interface design choice by Ubiquiti. When you go to set the IP address statically on the UNVR, the IP settings are in a very odd order. You have to set the gateway IP first, then the static IP that you want for the UNVR, and finally the subnet mask. Now typically we'd see IP address on top, then subnet, then gateway in that order. But in my haste to get the UNVR fixed, I swapped the gateway address with the static IP. And of course this did two things. First, it made my UNVR completely unresponsive on the IP that I thought I had assigned to it. And second, it duplicated the gateway IP address in my network, which is a bad thing. So after I had made that change, but I didn't realize what I had done, I tried rebooting the UNVR, which of course didn't work. Then I tried to factory reset it and restore from backup again, which failed the second time. So Let's now get back to the video where I gave up on the restore of the original UNVR, keeping in mind that the bigger network issue was already happening during all of this. So at this point, we are going to remove my replacement USB 3 flash drive. We're gonna put the old one back in, and I am going to box this thing up and ship it back to Ubiquiti. In the meantime, I'm going to migrate over to the new UNVR, and hopefully I didn't lose all of the data across my drives and I don't have to reset everything up from scratch. We will see. Before we do all that though, let's go back in time just a little bit so that we can look at the 10 gigabit switch upgrade that I did as part of this overall project. The problem that I have here is that this device on the very bottom is the RPS, and the RPS has these big, thick cables that are very difficult to plug in and out. And like once they're in, they're kind of like really in there. So in order to get this UNVR out, I can pull the power on the UNVR no problem, but it's much more difficult to pull the power on the RPS. I don't really have, I've tried. I've stuck my arm back here, both sides, tried both arms. I don't have the leverage to pull that big, thick RPS cable out of the back of this UNVR so that I can just easily pull it right out of this rack. So I'm gonna also have to pull my core 24 port switch. Since I'm gonna be pulling out that switch anyways, I'd like to upgrade it. I have a USW Enterprise 24, and the main advantage is that the switch port configuration on the Enterprise switch is such that all 24 ports are in a line across the front of the entire switch versus this one, which has 12 ports stacked on top of another 12 ports. The reason why that would be better for my particular home network rack here is because of this patch box that I have in place. The patch box is 24 cables across the front. So with that Enterprise switch, I can just go basically one-to-one across the entire row and then just have the top cables of the patch box ready to plug into whatever I need. So that'll be a much needed upgrade, but since this 24 port switch is essentially the core of my entire network, it's going to be quite disruptive to pull this thing out and then, get the other one swapped in. But no time like the present. We're just going to have to dig in and start doing it. So yeah, let's get to it. Few advantages for this USW Enterprise 24 PoE. Number one, if we start in the back, it has the locking power cable, which is always nice to have in an enterprise level switch. It also has an RPS port, so since I have the RPS on the other side for maintaining power for my UNVR, I'm also going to be able to use it for this device as well. Coming back around to the front, we have 12 1 gigabit Ethernet ports, 12 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports, and then two 10 gig SFP plus cages right here. So significantly more switching power than the US 24 PoE that I have in place today, which has 24 gigabit Ethernet ports and 2 gigabit SFP cages. All right, so this new switch has been adopted into UniFi. We are ready to go. I can actually unplug this one now. And then I have also separately used painter's tape to identify 3 different connections that were on separate untagged VLANs so that I can replicate those same VLANs in this switch once I'm putting everything back together. But now we are ready to take this thing down and pull out my main core switch as well as this UNVR. All right, so new switch is in place. Now we just need to wire it back up. So here's where I screwed up. Did you catch what I said there? I had figured out which cables were untagged into different VLANs, and I specifically used some painter's tape around those cables to ensure that they went back into the correct VLANs. You guys can probably see where this is going, but let me explain what happened with a diagram. For my internet connection, I have a Comcast business class cable connection that has 5 static WAN IP addresses. The Comcast business gateway that they provide has a 4-port switch on the back. Now this gives me 2 options for my networking gear. I can set a device such as the external WAN interface of my firewall to one of the 5 static WAN IP addresses. That's how I have my Edge Router 4 set up. But I can also plug a device into the Comcast Business Gateway and receive a 10.1.10.x IP address from a DHCP server that's running on the modem. Now, this setup actually gives me a lot of flexibility and allows me to use that 10.1.10 network in situations where I don't care about double net, such as over here in my test rack. Now, if I'm filming videos about some new piece of hardware, using the 10.1.10 network as my WAN means that I don't have to worry about masking out my real WAN IP address for YouTube. However, in order to move that 10.1.10 network around to different equipment, I've created an isolated VLAN just for that network, which means I can set any port in any one of my switches as untagged for that VLAN, which then gives me access to the Comcast WAN network on that specific port. When I rewired up the new switch, however, I plugged the Comcast WAN network directly into a switch port in my USW Enterprise 24 PoE, but I forgot to set that switch port as an untagged VLAN for the Comcast network. This then intermingled it with my main secure LAN, and what's worse, it added a second DHCP server on the network. Now, anyone with even the most basic networking knowledge knows that having 2 different DHCP servers on a single subnet is a bad idea, especially if those DHCP servers are handing out different IP subnets. Now, let's think about that for a second. The way that DHCP works is that you plug any new device into the network. If you're relying on that device to get its IP address from DHCP, it announces itself on the network as a new device and then requests an IP address. The DHCP server then responds and says, hey, here's your IP addressing information, right? So when you have 2 DHCP servers on a network, your devices have no idea which DHCP server is the right one. So they just take their IP address from whichever DHCP server responded first. And this leads to all kinds of network weirdness and explains a lot about what was happening. For example, some of my cameras weren't connecting back to UniFi Protect because they had received IP addresses on the network in the 10.1.10 network instead of my main secure LAN. Now, I had tried factory resetting these devices. I even got up on a ladder and pulled my floodlight down off the wall and brought it here in my office trying to figure out what was going on. I just had a sense that something wasn't right and I could not figure it out. It was during all of this troubleshooting that I finally noticed that one of my switches in UniFi had a 10.1.10 IP address, and then everything finally clicked. I had inadvertently routed Comcast WAN network into my own secure LAN. Now, once I had that figured out, I fixed the wiring issue, I rebooted all affected equipment, and when they came back up, they grabbed an IP address from now the only DHCP server on the network, and everything started to go back to normal. Any devices that were still affected, basically just as soon as their DHCP lease timed out, they would request a new IP, and the DHCP server, the correct DHCP server, would respond with a good IP address. So after all of that, I'm happy to report that I was finally able to successfully migrate all of my Protect cameras and settings over to the new UNVR that does not have that USB flash drive, and the other one has now been shipped back to Ubiquiti. I did unfortunately end up losing all of my past history of footage, but that was my fault because I had done a factory reset at one point and I left all of the hard drives in instead of pulling them out, and I think it wiped everything out and it had to rebuild the whole RAID volume. But not the end of the world, and now everything is snugged up in the rack and working beautifully. So a few takeaways here. First of all, if something doesn't feel right on your network, there's usually a good explanation. I really cannot stand it when there's an issue and all of a sudden it starts working, but you never really figure out what fixed it, right? I always prefer the logical, simple explanation for why something was a problem. The other thing is that my USB flash drive repair on my failed UNVR actually did work properly. It just seemed like it didn't work because I had also screwed up the swap of my main core switch. It's always a good idea to make one change at a time and then let that change settle in before changing something else. Now, to talk about the UNVR issue more generally, it definitely sucks that the original UNVRs had a USB flash drive that was prone to failure. But Overall, I think Ubiquiti has actually gone above and beyond to resolve that particular issue. Newer generations of the UNVR don't have that USB flash drive for booting. They also automatically extended the warranty out 2 years for any affected devices, and they have an upcoming software update that copies the boot partition over to the installed hard drive so that you kind of have a backup of it. These are all good fixes, and they all help mitigate that issue for customers. Now, I'm not saying that Ubiquiti is perfect in every way, but I do feel that they did a good job with this issue. The biggest takeaway, though, is that networking is complicated, right? Especially when you start getting into multiple VLANs and higher-end routing. If something isn't working, there's always a reason. So keep poking and prodding around until you figure it out. And also, even if you're a seasoned wannabe part-time network admin and YouTube quote-unquote influencer like me, it's always best to keep it simple, stupid. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to keep this party going, I have hand-selected a couple of videos on the right here for you to watch next. The top video is my IoT VLAN tutorial from my complete UniFi setup series, probably a video that I should go rewatch, and the bottom video is my recent full step-by-step tutorial for installing and configuring Home Assistant.